Hello, this is George from Ireland again. So I'm speaking to you about my thoughts on British politics. It's been a fascinating few weeks for the Labour Party, not a terribly happy few weeks. As you know, Jeremy Corbyn was re-elected, getting over 60% of the vote of Labour Party members and registered supporters. The question is, what next for the Labour Party? And remember, I predicted that Corbyn would be handsomely re-elected. Labour is flatlining, so that's obviously bad news for them. The opinion polls do not look good. Remember, at the last election, they only got about 33% of the vote. They got 28% the 2010 parliamentary election, so they're not much above that level. Labour is in trouble because the SNP is doing as strong as ever in Scotland. It's difficult to remember that only 10 years ago that was a Labour stronghold, and the SNP had very few members of Parliament, although they had plenty of MSPs. Luckily for Labour, the main Liberal left party is floundering as well, the Liberal Democrats, because they're led by the invisible man, Tim Farron. Were it not for that, then Labour would be an even deeper doo-doo. There's no sign of defections from the Labour Parliamentary Party to the Lib Dems yet, but some former Labour voters are voting Lib Dem now. The thing about the Liberal Democrats is they're no longer tarred with the unpopularity of being in coalition with the Tories. So the Lib Dems are quite weak, but that might improve, especially if they dump their current leader and replace him with someone who's got a little gravitas, maybe even bring back Nick Clegg. For instance, the SNP once restored a leader who had previously retired. That was Alex Salmond. Labour may well face another civil war. There's already talk of right-wing Labour MPs launching another putsch against Corbyn in a year, have a death of 1,000 cuts strategy, just wear him down by attrition. They reckon they've got to win eventually, and I think the party will finally get the message that Corbyn is a loser. So there's going to be blood on the carpet, even if there isn't a leadership challenge, because MPs are going to have to be reselected. That's partly because the number of seats is going to be reduced from roughly 650 down to about 600. So some sitting Labour MPs will no longer be virtually guaranteed to be able to stand for that same constituency at the next Westminster election. It really is back to the 80s for the Labour Party, like the Aqua song. Corbyn seems to have unlearned all the painful lessons of that time. Labour ought to be doing far better. Corbyn's challenger, Owen Smith, he correctly pointed out at the same time in the previous electoral cycle, under the much maligned Ed Miliband, Labour was doing rather better than it is now. Well, he said that admittedly before the leadership election. The economy is slowing down, the pound has fallen very sharply, a junior doctor strike might occur again, there's austerity going on, there's significant pressure on public services. So by rights, the main opposition party ought to be riding high in the polls. We're approaching mid-term. There are always mid-term blues for any government. Now, I know the situation is a little different, seeing as there's a new Prime Minister and a new PM tends to get a bit of a honeymoon, and indeed Theresa May has enjoyed one of those. The prospects look grim for Labour in the upcoming Westminster election. I know there's about 3.5 years to go. Labour can thank its lucky stars that the Fixed Term Parliaments Act was brought in by the previous coalition. Were it not for that, Theresa May might have called an election straight away, and Labour will probably be trounced because the Conservatives were well ahead, and obviously with a new leader, the Conservatives had a flush of support. The odd thing about that is, what if the two anti-Brexit parties, really anti-Brexit parties, which is the Lib Dems and the high majority of Labour, what if they got more of the votes, or indeed more of the seats? That might have seemed to undone the referendum result. Anyway, the situation is bleak for Labour because they cannot win in England alone. There are very few elections that they've won in England, and I do mean England, not the United Kingdom. In 1966, let's say 97, 2001, those are the only elections in recent decades that Labour have won in England. They've often slightly lost in England, but because they did very well in Wales and Scotland, got an overall majority in the United Kingdom. So that's why they desperately need Scots seats. They've only got one seat in North Britain. They lost so many Westminster seats last time. Some of them, like Glasgow Govan, they'd held for 120 years. So they had to face a major uphill battle to claw back a lot of constituencies there. The UKIP threat may recede, which could be good for Labour, especially if Brexit is completed. UKIP might even dissolve. I mean, it's in a flat spin with its leader Diane James resigning after only 18 days. And people might think that the EU issue has disappeared. A lot of UKIP voters are former Labour voters, are disaffected, working class, live in constituencies in eastern England. So that might be a boost to Labour. The trouble is, these voters tend to be in seats that Labour already hold. Theresa May is more popular than Corbyn, and people see her as prime ministerial even if they don't like her. So that'll be an asset to the Tories, and Labour's in trouble with her in charge. The economy is slowing, but it might well be growing again by 2020. Brexit will be completed. If it's seen as a success, that will be a fillip to the Tories. But even if Brexit is seen as a calamity, Corbyn can't exploit that, since he's pledged to give effect to Brexit, to respect the referendum result. However, Labour cannot be written off. That would be far too early. Labour is not a spent force. It has faced grim days before. Millions of people identify with it, much more so than identify with the Lib Dems. It seems to represent an interest. That is the centre-left party. Some people, because of their social class or the region they live in, see themselves as Labour voters. There are still millions of people in trades unions, most of whom tend towards Labour. There is very strong support for public services. The public tends to trust Labour on things like the NHS. Opposition to austerity is not going to disappear. So Labour cannot be written off. People have written its obituary prematurely before, such as in 1983. So Labour will somehow get through the next parliamentary election and choose a better leader, a more youthful leader, one with broader appeal to former Conservative voters, to floating voters. My hunch is it will be Chukwu Amuna.